Okay guys, we model everything in the previous video and now we can start looping all these parts. Let's start with these two objects that looks like they're chasing each other around the head. We can set the effect on the frame first. I'll grab an empty and place it somewhere there so you can see what we're doing. Select the wireframe head and let's add the vertex proximity modifier and we can connect it to a vertex group of the mesh. We have to create it first, so let's switch to edit mode, select everything with A, go down to the data tab and let's add a new vertex group and assign the selection. We're doing this so we can use the vertex group and add it here to the modifier. Target object is the empty and we'll use it to control this effect. Let's change in the mode to geometry. If we switch to weight paint, we can actually see what we have, which is this gradient around empty. From here we can adjust the way it will affect the mesh. If we switch back to the object mode, we can see what we have. We just have to place the proximity before the wireframe modifier. We also want the wireframe to affect the same vertex group that we created. And if we move now the empty, we can see the way it works. Maybe tweak further the lows and the highs, but that's how we did this part. For the other part, or these small spheres, we will use a different way with geometry node. For this we have to convert it to mesh, but before that I will just duplicate it and throw a copy into our backup folder. So turn it to mesh and separate all these spheres in edit mode. The problem now is that they all share the same origin point, but we want to bring the origin points back to geometry to each one of them. Let's also move them all to their own collection, while we still have them isolated. We'll use it now, but we can disable it from viewport and rendering so it doesn't interact with the geometry nodes tree we are creating. Switch here the editor and let's add a cube. Create a new geometry nodes tree and just grab and throw the instance group there. Connect it with the output. Delete the input of the cube. A few nodes to plug in here, like the scale instances. Get also vector math node. Position for the first vector input. And object info for the second input. We want to affect the instances scale with this. And the way to control this group was the empty. It looks weird now, but we can separate the children's. And let's plug map range node there. Maybe touch the values to adjust the effect. We can play further with some of the settings to create slightly different results. We can also add a call ramp there to precise this effect. So we have this working and we can set the path on which we will be running. Bring the empty back to its original position with Alt-G. Add a circle curve and scale it a little bit. We can see the edges, so let's increase the resolution to run the things smoothly along the curve. With the empty selected, we can add a follow path constraint, add the curve as target. So if we play with the offset, we have this, which make full circle at 100. It's time to animate a few things. I'll set it to 30 frames per second, which is 10 seconds at 300, and 450 is 15 seconds. We're about to add a lot of keyframes at frame 0 and frame 450. If we want to create a loop, we need exactly the same thing at the beginning and at the end of the animation. We'll add the keyframes at 0, but we'll skip one frame, and we'll render it from the first frame so there are no duplicating frames. With that being said, let's go to the beginning of the animation and add a keyframe to the offset, then go to the end, offset it with 100 and add the other keyframe. That's how we created this simple animation. check if everything is the same at the beginning and at the end. It starts slow and spinning up because we are using the Bezier interpolation, but if we press A here to select all keyframes, we can change it to linear. And now we have the same speed at all time. Let's also go to the preferences under the animation tab, change the interpolation to linear, so all the keyframes we are adding next are with the same speed. We can play with the curve now, set some nice path around the head, just push and pull the point in edit mode. We can scale or rotate these points like that. If we exit the isolation mode, we can see what we're actually doing and how to adjust the path. So I want to add some elements later and connect them with this empty effect that we just created. We can add two objects and make them look like they are chasing each other, popping in and out of the holes. So let's try to adjust the path in this way, going through the small spheres. This effect brings in some lag with it. We can see here in the corner the FPS on red. To improve this, we can enable simplify and set the maximum of subdivisions level from here. We can keep it 1 so it works nice with the wireframe head, maybe shade smooth, and if we play this should improve drastically the performance. And we can see now in real time what we are creating and what we are doing. So check it from different sides and adjust the path, correct the way you want it to move in and out of the head. From here we want to connect the objects that will follow the empty. I'll add a cylinder without a top or bottom face, rotate it on y-axis and scale it down. Apply the transform and let's add some thickness using the solidify modifier. Add also bevel to get some nice shading on the edges. Shade smooth and let's add the weighted normals at the end to improve the shading. We can add one more copy with the area modifier, offset a little bit and let's connect it with a path using the curve modifier. Use the X local axis to move it along the path, but let's add a few more edges so it's bending when it moves. We added the modifiers and we can animate it now. So let's go back to the beginning of the animation. And the problem here is that we don't have any parameters that we can use to loop the thing precisely like we did with the follow path constraint, for example. So we have to eyeball it and try to do it as close as possible. I'll use the notation tool and mark where is the cylinder location now by holding D. Open the side panel. Under the item we have the transforms and we need the location. We are here, so add location keyframe at the beginning. Let's say that this is the way we want to go forward. Checking the animation, and if the empty is animated in this way, we can just flip with negative offset at the end and replace the keyframe. So at the end of the animation we have to offset first the object on the X local axis. We can do it from here. Bring it somewhere here and let's precise it with shift. Add any other keyframe that we need. We can check if it looks the same at the beginning and at the end. This means that everything will be running smoothly when we change to the first frame. From here we can see how it works with the empty. We have some delay, but if we isolate again this object, we can fix that. This is because the empty is not at the center, but instead of the empty we can offset the objects in edit mode, and that's what we have the thing in the center, and it should work better now. If you need, you can also jump back to the geometry nodes and play with the settings to get a better transition. Moving to the teeth, shade them smooth first. we need the z-axis, but using the local coordinates of the object, not the global. This is the global. It can be tricky to loop the local coordinates, so we're just gonna take it from another object, like this cube. Let's do first the teeth that go in ups and down, so we'll need to animate location. This is the beginning, add in location keyframe, go a few frames forward, let's say 50. Move the cube on the z-axis a little bit, and add another location keyframe, so we have this animation. If we switch now to the graph editor, we can play with specific axes. We are using the z-axis here. If you hold Ctrl and the middle mouse, you can adjust the grid very easily by moving the mouse. Just like that, up and down, left to right. But the coolest thing here is that we have modifiers, like the cycles modifier, which will start repeating the animation. There is a jump cut, but we can change the mode to repeat mirrored, and now we'll go back to the original position smoothly. We have this mode for before and after the start. The trick here is to have the same thing at the beginning and at the end. That means the graph there have to be the same, so just grab the keyframe and move it a few frames. At the corner you can see how many frames you are offsetting with. Now we have it the same at the beginning and at the end. That means it will loop. If it's too high, we can adjust the animation from here, just like that. Let's now apply this animation to the teeth, using copy location constraint with the cube as target. We need only the z-axis and the local space of the owner, and we can see it's already working. Maybe apply the location, and if we need, we can play with the cube animation like that, offsetting the keyframes from the graph editor. It's getting very easy, especially if you know what you're doing here. We can copy the animation to a few more teeth by going to objects and copy the constraint. Apply the location, and for the other teeth we can do the same but with slightly different offset to looks like few going up and few down. Just duplicate the cube, then offset the keyframes. Get the name from the cube with F2, and if we copy the constraint we can just replace the cube name and have this as well. We can still play further with the settings, but that's the way to do it. When it comes to the rotation, we can do it exactly the same by using constraints. So if we duplicate the cube and delete the location keyframes, we can add rotation keyframe at the beginning and at the end. We all know that 360 is the perfect looping rotation. If we want it faster, we can multiply the values at the end and replace the keyframe. So the constraint on this one is copy rotation. If it's going crazy, bring the origin point to geometry. Touch the settings like we did with the location constraint, local space of the owner. So that's just a nice way to loop and animate things without thinking about location, rotation and stuff like that. When we're done with the animation, we can hide the cubes. I'll just move them into the backup folder. Copy the constraint to the object you want, and let's check the muzzle and how to animate it. In edit mode we can rotate the points like that. Ctrl T is the shortcut, and wherever is value input we can animate this, but unfortunately we can't animate multiple points at the same time, so we have to do it one by one. We can add the starting keyframes to all these points. Then go to the end, add 360 to the mint tilt values, and add another keyframes, so it's doing the whole rotation cycle. Check what we have. It looks nice, so let's do the same with the other curve. If you want to spin in the other way, just add negative 360 at the end and this will turn them into the other direction. We are done with this, so let's see what we can do with this one. In the modifiers we can animate any of these values that have dots on the side. Let's do a thickness, adding and removing some of the volume, giving feeling like the thing is breathing or something like this. Jump back to the graph editor when we can put it on repeat and loop it with a cycle modifier. Just change to repeat mirror it and let's adjust the keyframes so they're matching at the start and the end. Let's leave it like that and grab the other part. Adding the build modifier, which is very simple. This is on which frame we will start building, and here is how many frames it will take to build up the whole thing. So we have it here starting at the first frame and till the 100th frame everything is built. But let's just separate one of the parts so we have the building at the same time on both sides. Reducing the frames will increase the speed. We can start building later, let's say at 150 frame. Then duplicate the build modifier, having this one to start when the other one is complete. Reversing the build on this one. And we have this effect. The sad thing is that we can't push too much the build modifier because we start getting some bugs, but this will do a job. I'll do some cleanup here, removing some of the parts that left. On the curve that we turn it to mesh, we can turn the bevel modifier, and that's because we have vertices too close to each other at the end. But we can use the weld modifier before the bevel, and this will weld the mesh there, so we have it nice and smooth. Leave it like that, and let's see what else we can do. The nose loop we have to do with Boolean operations, and this is very bad, especially for animations. On top of that, it will slow down the playback a lot, but I guess it's okay for this thing we're doing. So I'll grab a cube to use it as a cutter. We want the origin point at the bottom face, and in edit mode we'll move it up, holding the snapping tool on with control, which will snap on the grid now. Adjust the snapping option to the center, on face, align rotation, and by holding control now it will snap to the faces and rotate along. We want to snap it there, but it's going in this way because we have flip it normal, which you can recalculate like that. Everything is okay now, the snapping working as it should. We can move it away from the nose a bit. For the cube, if we go to the viewport display, we can change it to bounce, so it's easier to work with. Check which axis we have to animate, press it twice for the local axis, we are doing the Y. We will animate only one part of the array and put that on repeat, similar to what we did with the teeth but without the cycle modifier. So let's add a location keyframe at the beginning of the animation, offset the timeline with 50 frames, then move the array on the local y-axis, so the whole cube passes by the Boolean object. And now we just have to cycle this simple animation and it will look like the whole thing is moving. We have to do it in a way so when we duplicate the first frame looks like the next step after the last frame, if that makes sense. Shift R to duplicate the last action a few times till the end of the timeline. We can test what we have and still tweak the curve if needed. Let's add in the Boolean modifier to see the final thing. This will kick in the lagging, but we can drop a few frames to get a better performance like that. Unfortunately, the Boolean can be very hard to set up. Most of the cases need a clean ups after the Boolean, and it's really have to be avoided, especially for animations. For the other part that we have here, we can just link the animation data with Ctrl L, then add the Boolean modifiers at the end. If the playback is getting too heavy, we can always disable the Boolean modifiers, check what we have and work it out without a delay. For this part here we will do again a Boolean operation, but we will hide it inside the head, because here on the outside end we will just scale it down, scale the radius to 0. If we have 2 points next to each other, it will work better. Touch the object with a few more edge loops and maybe scale it down a bit. This will be the cutter and I'll put it somewhere there to keep it hidden. If we want to isolate some parts, we can just select them and press the tilt button, and this will make the adjustment of these parts a way more easier. We will do the same with animation, just offset a few of this, then repeat the cycle. Adding location keyframe at the beginning, offset 50 frames, and we can use the annotation tool to help with that thing and see where we have to move it. The trick is to make it look like the last keyframe is 1 frame before the first keyframe. If it don't run smoothly, we can always delete keyframes and tweak the first 2. Let's see what we have and how everything is working. If you have these keyframes with nothing selected, that means we have annotation left, so we can just delete it. We added these keyframes at 0, so let's select them all and just offset with 1 frame, so they start at 1 and finish at 450. Do the same and with the other parts that we animated in that way. I'll disable the Boolean to check if it's running the way it has to be. Maybe even isolate the selection so we're not distracted by the other objects. If we remove the lines as well, everything looks fine. Even if it doesn't, we can touch that later. The important thing is to have everything done before the final cycles render, so we will have to run a couple of test renders before that to make sure it's all good. We can do different animations for each one of these side parts. Starting with the bottom one, I'll duplicate it and turn it into mesh. So we can grab an edge loop and turn it into curve. We'll use this curve to run some objects on it, like there's some parts running around the edge of this part. Let's grab a sphere for this, maybe bring it back to the center, scale down and shade smooth. Add the curve modifier and connect it to the curve object here. Copy the location and rotation and let's animate it. Starting at 100, add a location keyframe. Move a few frames and offset the sphere along the local axis. We don't have to be precise on this one, somewhere there. And add another location keyframe, so we have this animation. We can add more keyframes to cycle it around a few more times. Just checking what we have, making sure it's all good. And let's grab the other part. We have a few modifiers here, so let's do something with them. Let's animate the wireframe offset. We already did it with one of the muzzle parts, but we used the cycles modifier. We can do it here just like that. For the third part, we're using again the proximity wave modifier to pull up some of the mesh. That's why it's the cube, we'll use it instead of the empty. Change the display to bounds to see what we are doing. Let's add the proximity. And for this we need a vertex group, so let's create an assigned one with everything selected. Connect the modifier with the vertex group and the cube. Change the mode to geometry, maybe faces, and let's see what we have in the weight paint mode. Adjust it so we have only the cube mass pulling the stuff. The idea is to add the displace modifier and connect it with the vertex group that we created. Now we can use the cube to control the displacement. You can leave it like that, but I want to flip it. We can do it from here. We can still adjust the cube in the way we want it to work. And let's duplicate it in edit mode to create a few more of these waves. I'll put it somewhere here and add the location keyframe. Then move it there at the end of the animation and add another location keyframe. So now we have this wavy-like effect. Let's just place the mirror modifier at the bottom to have it on the other side as well. So many things we can create with this. And let's grab one more part and do something similar with the proximity weight. We can just duplicate the cube from here to save some time. Create new vertex group with everything selected. Set the modifier settings like we did before. We get to move the proximity before the wireframe here, and we can already see something happening. Play with the settings, maybe flip it for this effect. Just duplicate the cube in edit mode if you want a few more waves. set the new starting and ending keyframes, and we are done with this part as well. That was everything for this part. If you like what we're doing, check also the final third part where we will add some materials and set the final scene and renderings.